This conference will now be recorded.
We are elated this morning to have Senator Doug Jones with us for a conversation with our community and a legislative update. Senator Jones was born May 4, 1954 in Fairfield, Alabama. He has a bachelor's from the University of Alabama and a JD from Cumberland School of Law. He previously served as the U.S. Attorney for the Northern District of Alabama prior to becoming our senator in December 12, 2017 through a special election. He has a lifelong passion for fighting for justice, and a commitment to service, and his role in the United States Senate continues. I do want to specifically mention a couple of accolades that he has recently received. He is the recipient of the 2020 U.S. Chamber Spirit of Enterprise Award. And for those of you who are not as familiar as some of us may be with the U.S. Chamber, that exemplifies a commitment to supporting pro-business legislation as well as bipartisan leadership. He is also the recipient of the U.S. Chamber Jefferson Hamilton Award for bipartisanship and the Abraham Lincoln Leadership for America Award. He is one of two senators to have received both honors for those awards this year. And we want to welcome Senator Jones, and we appreciate you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Heather. I hope you guys can hear me a little bit, and I apologize for the technical difficulties and for the somewhat colorful language. If you might would have really gotten amused if I had not muted myself a couple of times, but I really appreciate this opportunity. I think this is the first time I've had a chance to talk to the Etowah County Chamber since I got elected, and there has been a tremendous amount that has gone on since I was sworn in on January the 3rd of 2018. Just to give you a brief something, and there are so many things that I would love to talk to you about, but it would take all day. But I do want to mention I'm a member of 3 committees in the Senate. I'm a member of the Health Committee, which is Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, which, as you can imagine, has been incredibly active over the last year or so, but especially in the last 4 months. I'm a member of the Banking Committee. That's banking and housing, in which we've been doing an awful lot of work for small banks, for community banks. We passed the banking reform bill last year or 2 years ago in order to try to help our smaller banks, medium-sized banks, get the relief that they needed from the Dodd-Frank legislation of 10 or 12 years ago. And I'm a member of Armed Services, which for Alabama, that's a pretty big and important spot. Alabama contributes so much to our national security, and the bills that we work on, our appropriations processes, our National Defense Authorization, which we're right in the middle of now, I can tell you is incredibly important to the state of Alabama. From Redstone Arsenal to Anniston to Fort Maxwell Air Force Base, Fort Rucker, also down in Mobile. We have an amazing array of military industrial complex in Alabama that I'm proud to have been a part of and to have been able to assist in bringing. You're going to see the NDAA coming out of the Senate probably in the first week or so when we get back next week. And we've been able to get an awful lot of good things in for the state of Alabama. But with so much going on, I really kind of wanted to focus on the most significant issues at hand. And I've said many times over the last couple of months, or particularly since Memorial Day, that we've been kind of experiencing a crisis trifecta. We started out as a healthcare crisis that morphed into an economic crisis, and now there is a particular crisis for all Americans in our minority communities, on racial inequalities that we've known that's existed for so many years. I think the pandemic really put a spotlight on those inequities. I mean, we've known them, we've known about them, we've talked about them. We've worked to address them, but we've just not done enough. Those are in the areas of healthcare, education, economic opportunities. Put a spotlight on our dependence on foreign countries and foreign manufacturers for prescription drugs and other healthcare manufacturing needs. Then along across our iPhones and iPads and television screens around the Memorial Day weekend came the images of a black man in Minnesota with a police officer's knee on the back of his neck. And even as he called out for his mama, and as he said he could not breathe, the knee remained on his neck as he became unconscious. Even though we had seen similar images in the past, the spotlights that had placed on the racial inequities in this country became kind of that magnifying glass in the sunlight over a dry leaf. And you all know what happens when that occurs. With that image, the racial inequities that we've known existed in this country began to smolder, as many in this country said enough is enough, and so many more in Alabama and across the country realized that not enough had been done for America to live out the true meaning of its creed, that all men and women are created equal. So I want to take a minute to talk about each one of those and some of the things that I've got going on, some of the things that I see coming down the pike as we go back after the July 4th recess. Remember, let's talk about the healthcare a little bit. Remember that the world had never seen this virus before December or January. Never seen it. There were no immunities in the world before that time. No one on this planet had immunities. There were no treatments. There were no vaccines. And this virus began to spread and spread rapidly. And as you know, it can be both serious with long-term consequences and deadly. Despite being the greatest country in the world with the most sophisticated research and medical professionals, the United States has been ravaged by this virus. Today, while the United States has only 5% of the world's population, we have 25% of the COVID-19 cases and 23% of the world's deaths. In Alabama, our first case was confirmed on March 13th, just 4 months ago today. But today, when the new numbers are released, we will likely see our case count over 53,000, and over 1,100 of our friends, our neighbors, and family members have lost their lives. What's especially disturbing is that in Alabama, our 7 and 14-day averages have risen dramatically, as have the hospitalizations since Memorial Day. Hospitalizations are going up every day. And interestingly, the average age of those testing positive for COVID is 15 years younger than it was just a couple of months ago. And folks, it just didn't have to be this way. Governor Ivey, I believe, was very careful to try to open and get Alabama's economy opening slowly, according to the healthcare data. She's had great folks talking to her, advising her. Her current order is still a safer at home order, but the problem is that so many people just didn't pay attention to her message. When folks started hearing that we were going to be able to go out to restaurants and bars and go shopping and do all of the things to try to get back to normal, folks forgot that she was still saying that it was safer at home. They forgot that she was saying that you've got to social distance, that you've got to wear masks and face coverings to get out there. And sadly, wearing a face covering all of a sudden became a political issue when it should have been a nonpartisan health issue. That is created. There is no question that has created the problem. The numbers we're seeing are very discouraging. Every healthcare official will tell you that. And as we finish the July 4th, where numbers are just beginning to roll in with from the July 4th holiday, and as we approach school opening up, hopefully in August, the numbers have to start trending downward. We can't attribute this to more testing, by the way. Frankly, testing has been somewhat flat and is still an issue to try to get tests out there. We are doing more testing, but the fact that our rate of positives has also gone up in Alabama, as it has around the country, indicates that there is just simply more community spread. So please, your community leaders, think about that. Think about your example that you can lead when you can wear a mask and you can do those things to stop the community spread. I've said from the beginning, don't listen to the politicians, including me, unless we're giving you the numbers and facts and statistics of healthcare professionals. So when politicians try to minimize wearing a mask, or they try to minimize the dangerous levels of community spread of this virus by saying we should not test as much, we should do less testing, that we'll have fewer cases if we do less testing. Don't believe it. No, that is not true. No, please. Fewer cases do confirm do not mean fewer cases in the community. We cannot take an ostrich-like approach and stick our head in the sand and pretend that this virus is just going to miraculously go away. And it is not just an elderly person's disease or virus anymore. It is spreading to our young people, and they spread it to all of those that have potential pre-existing conditions. As your senator, I have tried to do all I can to address the problems in front of us, working with my colleagues to pass the CARES Act and 3 other pieces of legislation that pumped about $3 trillion into our economy. The Federal Reserve had pumped about $3 trillion more. The legislation, I believe, has been erroneously described as stimulus legislation. I think that label is incorrect. Make no mistake, we weren't stimulating anything with that money. We were trying to save the economy. We were trying to save lives, save businesses. We were trying to stop and levelize things from going to the bottom. And I think overall that has happened, but it is just taking a lot longer to get that curve going back up, but with both the economy as well as our health. Our goal has been to save lives and to save livelihoods. But I've also been trying to look forward, see the inequities, the problems, and what we can fix it to going forward, and how we can rebuild to make our country stronger, to make it better, to make it more just, to plug the holes of the weaknesses that we know that we have. One of those glaring examples is in healthcare manufacturing. I am sure that you saw early on the critical need for personal protection equipment, the concern about the number of ventilators. And the fact is, the United States has allowed the manufacturing of most drugs and medical devices to drift offshore. We are at the end of a long, thin supply chain. We've not had a factory that produces penicillin in the United States for over 15 years. 90% of generic drugs consumed in the United States, 70% of respirators are made in another country, generally India or China. Prior to the COVID-19 pandemic, estimates that we were only producing about 5% of the PPE, the personal protection equipment that we consume. This is really, folks, a matter of national security, but it also gives us some substantial opportunities. The truth is that we're heavily dependent on primarily China for both medication and medical supplies. The Chinese government subsidizes the industries, leading to lower prices, and that has killed U.S. production. What's true for other products, this is not unique. At state-run media outlets, China has threatened to withhold medicines from the United States. We have seen now that stocking up before a pandemic is not an answer. Medications have expiration dates, and so do masks. And we've got to work to make our strategic stockpile stronger and replenish it ever so often. That's why all the way back in April 21st, as a matter of fact, I wrote Governor Ivey encouraging her to form a task force to attract healthcare manufacturing jobs to Alabama. We became one of the leaders in automobile manufacturing, and we can do it in healthcare manufacturing. And frankly, guys, I will tell you that the idea for that grew out in part from the meeting in the roundtable that I had in Gadsden about the closing of the Goodyear plant. We all knew that the handwriting was on the wall about Goodyear. And what we could do with that 60-acre facility that is now sitting idle was something that I thought about a great deal. And it dawned on me. So why not think about creative ways to take idle plants like that and work to Alabama's advantage in a healthcare space to bring those jobs to Alabama. So that's why, after I wrote the governor encouraging her to do this task force, a couple weeks later in May, I introduced a bill called the Build Healthcare Equipment in America Act, which would give tax incentives American businesses to repurpose these idle factories or to start up new ones, to bring those jobs here. The bill would begin to level the playing field. It will give tax incentives to do just that, and also give communities opportunities to build the infrastructure around those tax incentives. You know, right now the pharmaceutical market is currently $1.3 trillion. MedTech is $430 billion. By 2024, MedTech is expected to be $600 billion. There is no reason why we can't do that in Alabama, but we got to have the tax incentives, and I'm hoping that my bill will get moved in this next package so that we can maybe get some of that working for the future, not just here. Because I will tell you, folks, we're not going to go back to days where our stockpile is out of date. We're going to be using more personal protection equipment. It's not just for healthcare workers. We're going to need them in businesses. We're going to need them in schools. That is not going to change probably ever, but certainly not for a long, long time to come. We need to be forward thinking in Alabama and this country about getting these jobs back, but especially in Alabama. There's a couple of other areas I want to address real quick of things that I'm looking at for the next package. When we get back to DC, we're finally going to start talking about the next package of legislation. Jay Powell, the Federal Reserve Chairman, has said consistently that we have got to make sure that we get this back, that Congress acts. I think that's incredibly important to listen to the experts like that on our economy. One of the areas that I've been focused on so much has been city and county governments. Our city and county governments are about to get in trouble. We all know that they've lost revenue, but the fact of the matter is we've not helped them. There's not been enough going, and sooner or later, they're going to have to start laying off people. 20% of the workforce or thereabouts in this country belong to city, county, and state government. And if we're not careful, we're going to see another whole wave of unemployment for government employees simply because the federal government has not stepped up to help the first line responders in county governments and city governments that have been there for the people in their communities from day one. I've got a bill that I'm a co-sponsor of with Senator Wicker from Mississippi that'll create a stabilization fund for restaurants. They were especially hard hit to try to get them. We know that they're going to come back, but they're also going to be probably one of the slowest industries, that in the entertainment industry, which is a separate issue that we've been dealing with to try to come back. We're having to deal with farmers. Farmers have taken triple whammies over the last couple of years between hurricanes and drought and weather and the trade wars from the administration. They have taken substantial hits, and now we are in danger of losing family farms in Alabama and across the country if we're not careful. One of the things we've asked for is for a Department of Justice investigation into beef prices, because it appears that our cattle farmers in Alabama and elsewhere are on the low end of the total of the stick when it comes to farm prices and cattle prices. What is seeing is that everyone that is the meat packers, they're getting all the money, but those that are raising the cattle, those that are doing that, those that are on the front lines they are really taking a hit, and we've got to help our farmers. You all know about the Payroll Protection Program that was part of the CARES Act. Over 65,000 businesses have benefited to the tune, in Alabama alone, of over $7 billion. 670,000 Alabamians have remained on the payrolls because of that program. It was not a perfect program, and quite frankly, I was concerned about going through banks and making it a loan, then a grant. But the fact is, it's worked out fairly well. I think overall, after we got some kinks worked out, so much businesses in Alabama and employees have benefited. But time is running out, and my concern is that 4-month period for the Payroll Protection Program, as it runs out and our economy is still slowly opening, we're going to have more people that can't go back to work because the businesses can't handle it. And those people, without another type of payroll protection program, they're going to be on the unemployment rolls, and that is going to really take another lick to the economy. So one of the things that I've introduced is a paycheck security program that I would like to see in this next package. It gives businesses the opportunity to keep people on the payroll using grants and rebates from the payroll taxes that they pay, get immediate refunds from the payroll taxes that they pay, so that they can keep people on the payroll. Something like that, I believe, has to happen. Again, every economist that I'm reading on both sides of the aisle, nonpartisan economists, are saying we've got to do more for individuals and businesses until we can get through this crisis and get a vaccine. Of course, I've all talked about Medicaid expansion. I won't go into that in great detail. I think that would be important for Alabama. We've introduced a Rural Broadband Act that would create a $20 billion fund to accelerate the need for broadband across the state. I was surprised the other day in talking to some folks that the numbers for broadband in Alabama are far greater than what I thought, mainly because technology has gone so fast. We have got a huge hole in the state for good, reliable broadband that is affordable to folks. So the broadband, the Acceleration Act that I've introduced with several of my colleagues would address that. The most important topic going on right now, if you've seen the news this week, is how do we open our schools? You know, that is a huge problem for everybody. Everyone wants to see our schools open. Everyone knows that it's important, not just for our kids' education, for their well-being, their social development. We've got to try to figure out how to get kids in school, but we've got to figure out how to do it safely and effectively to keep them safe, to keep the teachers safe, to keep their families safe. I will tell you, we're hearing from teachers all across the state that they are concerned. They're very concerned about getting in there without the appropriate safeguards. So right after leaving the other day, Washington the other day, along with two other of my colleagues, we introduced a bill. It was Senator Debbie Stabenow, who's a Democrat from Michigan, and Senator Bill Cassidy, who's a Republican from Louisiana. Bill happens to be a doctor, by the way. We introduced the Reopen Schools Safely Act, and that's going to create a grant program that will allow the federal government to give states money based on their school-age children population, ages 5 to 24, mainly to help local schools do the things necessary to open safely. State School Superintendent Dr. Mackey has said that on average, it may cost each school system $1.8 million to do the things necessary, to buy the masks, to maybe reorganize the learning setting, to hire more healthcare professionals, to do those things necessary to keep schools, teachers, and families safe. Our school systems know that. You guys know that as well as anybody in Etowah County and Gadsden. We cannot afford an extra $1.8 million in school systems throughout the state and throughout this country. So the federal government has got to step up. It is the only thing we can do. And I understand that there is all concerns about the money that we're spending and the debt. But folks, we don't have a choice. States can't do it. Cities and counties can't do it. The federal government is the only entity that can come in and help save our economy, get our environments in businesses as well as our schools safe and healthy. And so we cannot let the perfect be the enemy of the good. We will deal, I believe, we will deal with infrastructure and things that will stimulate the economy down the road, but we cannot do that right now when we are still in the midst of a crisis and we have not seen a second wave. We are still in the first wave. Every healthcare professional will tell you. Finally, I want to mention just one other thing. You know, it was 57 years ago here in Birmingham. Peaceful protesters stood up to police dogs and fire hoses in an effort to have their voices heard. They stood with the hope that by confronting head-on but peacefully the evils of racism and Jim Crow, the nation could live out its creed of being one nation, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. 4 months later, 4 girls died in a bomb blast at the hands of those who would try to destroy that hope. We have made a lot of progress since those days, folks. A lot of progress. Absolutely. You have to just look around, and I can see on the call here, but we still have a long ways to go. As a whole, the events of the past few months and days have opened old wounds and laid bare the disparities in our society, from healthcare to education to economic opportunities and equal justice under the law. We face challenges, dangers, and fears that are not simply days old, but have existed for centuries. The fact that we're facing them now at once is both overwhelming but clarifying. We know everyone on this call believes in the dignity of each person and all people, and that is how we begin to resume the lives that we knew before this health crisis began, not to just simply go back to normal, because normal for so many people was not a good life. Significantly, we've got to move to a better tomorrow. Dignity must flow from each of us, and it must flow from the institutions that we have formed. We've got to give folks their voices. We've got to give folks the opportunities. It is not simply a matter of bringing down monuments. We have to bring down barriers. We cannot condone any act of violence. We have to listen to the voices of despair and move to a better place. I've said for many years, folks, that so many of our nation's divisions started in the South. You all know it. But I also believe the South is where we can also lead in the healing of this country. In Birmingham, Mayor Woodfin and business leaders have joined together, much like they did back in the early 60s, to come up with a program to give better opportunities for kids in the Birmingham schools, but also to be more transparent with minority-owned businesses and giving everyone an equal opportunity at the American dream. It is so eerily familiar to what happened in 1963. The bottom line of that is this. It was in the early 60s, it was the business and community leaders like yourself that stepped up to make Alabama a better place. Many of those leaders resisted the change of civil rights for many years, but they recognized that we were witnessing a historic moment, and that their future, their family's future, their community's future depended on their actions. This is a historic moment, folks, one that we cannot let pass. We have to reject the division, the tribalism, and the inequality of the past and lead us to something that is better, not just with words, but with actions. We can be one Alabama, we can be one America, but it's going to require all of us to step up and be counted and do those things that we know are the right things. So thank you very much for letting me share a few things with you today. Again, I apologize for the lateness, but I can be here for however long you want me to answer a few questions or take some comments, however you want to do, proceed it from here. So thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Senator Jones. That was phenomenal. Wow, a lot of information. I do want to mention to you specific Etowah County numbers from the Paycheck Protection Program loan. 10,500 jobs at minimum were saved through the Paycheck Protection Program, as much as possibly, because we know how the SBA released the larger loans came out with ambiguous numbers. They were in brackets, and the smaller loans came out without names but exact amounts. As much as $134 million in Etowah County alone. I have to admit, when I saw those numbers, Michael Rogers from the Gadsden Times reached out to me and sent over a spreadsheet that he had already worked on and pared down. I was blown away and so encouraged because it was so much needed. I just want to express my appreciation for the work that you did. And it was absolutely a terrifying time. We were honored to get to be a conduit for the information, but I know it had to be extremely stressful in Washington, working through these with virtually no guide map, just no precedents to work with. We do want to open the floor. If you have a question, we ask that you put that into the chat. Will is going to moderate those questions. We'll take 3 or 4. I don't want to take too much of the senator's time. I know he's got a lot more going on today, and we do apologize, Senator, for all of the technical difficulties. We're probably gonna switch over to Zoom before too long, and just migrate to that.
Don't worry about that. That's on my end. I should have been better prepared.
So do we have any questions from our attendees? If you don't mind, I'll start off with one while we're waiting to see if anybody wants to submit anything to chat. I know that you brought up schools returning and how we can return safely. And there have been a lot of questions, and I didn't know if you might have any clarification. With the Family First CARES Act, there is an extension of medical emergency leave. Should a teacher become infected with COVID and extended a full 12 weeks in addition to any existing leave, how do you anticipate some of our safeguards to protect those that are sick having an impact long-term on teachers? And do you think it's going to be a struggle to recruit substitute teachers to come into a classroom right now?
I think yes. The answer to the last question is yes. I do think it's going to be a struggle. I can tell you, people, teachers and faculty members I hear from across the state are very worried about going in. We're not prepared. I mean, let's just face it, we are not prepared. I think Dr. Mackey and local schools have been doing a great job of trying to get prepared. But the fact of the matter is, we don't have enough testing out there, even for a statewide basis. I mean, theoretically, we should have already had testing available to schools right now so that kids could be tested on a routine basis.
I think we may be having some broadband issues. We're frozen up again, unfortunately.
You can't just test somebody one day that's going into the same environment every day. You got to test them so often to make sure that they've not contracted this virus. And we're not going to have a vaccine for at least the end of the year, probably not to the first of next year. Incredibly disappointed about it. The CARES Act the HEROES Act was passed by the House, which is by no means a perfect bill at all. There's a lot in there that'll never make it into law and should make it into law, but at least provided us a framework. We got to get some money. What I see happening is that, first of all, every school system is going to be different. There's not one size fits all. And they're going to have to try to modify classrooms so that kids can stay apart from each other. I think for a while, some of these places are going to have to wear masks. We're going to have to limit the contact. We may have to do scheduling. But again, every system is different. If a community is not seeing a real rise or that they've gone down, what we're seeing in Europe and other places is that kids can come back to school when those numbers are getting down because there's some data to suggest that kids don't spread the virus like teenagers and adults do. So I think we've got to watch for the hot spots. We've got to make sure that we do things, and that's going to be up to local folks. My job is to do everything I can to try to get the resources to folks to do this and hope that on a local level, they follow the data, they follow the healthcare professionals and listen to them, and they try to keep it out of politics, which is going to be hard to do headed into November. But that's what's got to happen. We've got to listen to our healthcare professionals and the local folks and follow their advice.
I do have one question that wasn't able to get submitted through chat. Patricia Falcon with the James Berry Center is a advocacy center for children who have suffered abuse. She asked, can you give any insight on additional support that's coming to nonprofits, specifically nonprofits that support children?
Well, child care centers are going to be an important part, I think, of the next package. As we still are in an uncertain world, and as we're trying to get our economy opened up, people have to go back to work, and they're going to need help with their child care. If schools are opening, that will help us. They're not opening or they're doing partial, that's going to be a problem. So I think from that standpoint, childcare is going to be a huge issue. With regard to nonprofits, what we've tried to do so far is to make sure that nonprofits are included in any of the programs that we've got, whether it's emergency loans, whether it is the payroll protection plan, and we've done some things to give tax deductions, tax credits to encourage people to give to the nonprofits. I think that's how we'll do it. I don't know if you'll see money directly, except in the form of trying to help people stay on the payroll, trying to get emergency loans, but also with the tax credits where we'll try to incentivize folks to go through. We've really put nonprofits as best as we could in the same category as the for-profits to give nonprofits the ability to enjoy the same program out there. And I see that trying to continue with, especially when it comes to nonprofits that are advocates for child care.
I think we've got a question from Martha Lavender. Will, if you want to take that over?
Yeah, absolutely. So Senator Jones, Martha Lavender, who's the president of Gadsden State Community College, She says, thank you for the CARES funds for education. Gadsden State was awarded the HBCU CARES funds to support their technology infrastructure and our HBCU campus. There's more flexibility in these funds, but even the Department of Education representatives tell us that the audit procedures have not been defined. Do you have any input on this issue?
Look, I'll tell you what, Mother, if you will touch base, you know Rebecca in my office, touch base with her about that and let us see what we can find out. One of the problems that we have seen with the Department of Education, the Department of Agriculture, and others, they have just been slow to help develop these guidelines. They were a lot slower with the guidelines than we were trying to get this legislation passed, and that's been very, very frustrating. I know that we put money in CARES. I hope we do that again. For folks on this call that may not know, we've gotten a tremendous amount of additional funds over since I've been in the Senate for HBCUs that I believe Gadsden State has benefited from. We've permanent funding, we've had increases, and I believe that we will have to do more, either as part of my opening school safely or in a separate package that we've got to look at. This next package has got to be a fairly big one as well. There are just too many problems across this country that have to be addressed that cannot all be addressed locally. But if you will talk to Rebecca, let's see what we can do to help you with those guidelines. I will tell anybody on this call that if you have had problems with your unemployment, with employees, with payroll protection, any issues that you know have had trouble with, please get in touch with our office. We've got folks in Birmingham and Huntsville that have been on the phones constantly since we've been out, trying to help individuals and help businesses, banks, you name it. That's what we're there for. So please give us a call if you got a problem.
Okay. Senator Jones, we have another question regarding churches. Will there be any assistance for those churches who do not have employees but have had to close due to COVID? These churches rely on parishioner donations, and because the churches are closed, they're having problems making payments on mortgages and utility bills. Can you speak to that?
You know, that's a really good question. Most of the questions I've got have been involving employees and keeping employees, and we made sure that churches were eligible for the payroll protection program. I need to look at that a little bit. I've not seen that. And again, if somebody would call my office and give us some specifics on that, we might see what we can do to just kind of help keep the doors open. I know it's really important. You know, mortgages are important not only for businesses, for churches, and in individuals. I do worry about an overall mortgage and foreclosure crisis that we may see coming. And we sure don't want that to happen to our local churches. So I've not heard anything specifically, but if somebody will call the office about it, whoever asked the question, talk to someone, it'll get on our radar as we go back in next week to start trying to figure out what's going to be in this next package. The goal in this next package, by the way, is not to make it political like what happened with the HEROES Act in the House immediately became a political football. You know, what I want to try to see, and it's what I think that the Chamber of Commerce recognized in giving me the bipartisanship award, we need to get a bill on the floor that can pass overwhelmingly, that can then go to the House and pass overwhelmingly, and President Trump will sign. That's what needs to be happening. We don't need to be taking a lot of crazy political votes. We need to get this done.
I think that leads in well to one of the other comments that we received. Speaking more on that award, can you give us some examples of the bipartisanship activities you've engaged in? I've heard that you've got a really positive relationship with the Republican delegation from our state. Can you give a few examples of some activities, some acts, some bills that you've been able to work across the aisle and get things accomplished?
Sure. You know, well, first of all, Senator Shelby and I have a great relationship. We work together to try to get the appropriations process, particularly in our military, with my seat on Armed Services, and he is chairman of the Appropriations Committee, to try to get things for the state of Alabama. We talk often and we get together often to try to figure out those things that we can do to try to bring things home for the state of Alabama. I've been very fortunate in my time in the Senate in 2.5 years. We have had 17 of my bills, not ones, I've co-sponsored hundreds, just almost all of them bipartisan. But in the course of 2.5 years, at a time when there's not an awful lot of legislation, original legislation that is getting through the Congress, I've had 17 bills that have been enacted into law and signed by President Trump. Those are all bipartisan, and they range anywhere from a cold case records collection act. You guys know that I prosecuted the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing cases. So these cold civil rights cases has always had an interest. And when I introduced that bill, I did it because there were some kids in town that I wanted to hear my speech. And Ted Cruz was the presiding officer, heard my speech, liked the bill, became a co-sponsor, or lead co-sponsor with me. And together we got that bill enacted into law, and the president should be appointing the first members of that commission very soon. We worked to get the permanent funding for HBCUs with Senator Lamar Alexander. Senator Alexander from Tennessee is chairman of the Health Committee. He has been a real mentor. He and I have worked closely on a number of bills that have gotten introduced and passed as pieces of other bills. The significant one was the permanent funding for HBCUs that included the first revision of that federal student aid application that everybody dreads every year called the FAFSA. We've reduced the number of questions on that, and we've got a bill pending to do even further. Senator Kennedy and I have worked on bills to help small businesses in rural America to try to get away from a lot of red tape. Senator Cotton from Arkansas and I have done 2 or 3 bills to do essentially the same thing. We've changed the tax code for property evaluation because it got messed up in the tax bill. We had a bill pending that corrected that is helping real estate developers and folks in particular do that. So there, I got to tell you, you see a lot of the partisanship on the floor of the Senate and in what I call dueling press conferences. But the fact of the matter is, I've been really fortunate to be on the number of bills that I've been on and to have as many of them enacted into law. We can get you the whole list, but I'm very proud of the work that we have done, and there's so much more to be done in that area, especially when it comes to healthcare, small businesses. I want to mention one that is probably the one I'm the proudest of, and that is the elimination of the military widows tax. You guys may or may not be familiar with what that was, but for over 30 years, military widows and widowers whose family members were lost due to a service-related injury or death were denied the benefits that they were due. There were 2 benefits that were due them. One was a statutory administered under the Department of VA that all folks get. Then others that were like insurance that each service member bought and paid for that was administered through the Department of Defense. But what happened about 30 years ago, Congress decided that DOD and the VA could offset those. And so these widows and widowers that had both benefits, it should have benefits, were getting only about 55% of what they were due. For 20 years, widows had been pounding the hill, that eliminated. And every time Gold Star they get a lot of sympathy, but no action. Try to get bills were introduced that never made it through Congress because they said it's just too much money. When they came and visited me, particularly some from Alabama, including Kathy Milford from down in Mobile, we made it our mission to right that wrong, to make sure that those folks get what we're due. We owe a fiduciary responsibility to those who have served our country. We owe a fiduciary duty to the family members of those who have served this country. And I could not believe that the government was doing what they're doing. So I set out, I enlisted my friend Susan Collins, Republican from Maine, and together we just wouldn't give up. And last year, that military widows tax was eliminated. When we passed it with the NDAA, there were 30 of the Gold Star widows in the balcony that just erupted into cheers. It was one of the most emotional, fulfilling days I've had in the Senate.
I can imagine that I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. That's pretty amazing. One last question. Will you correct me if you see anything else there? I know sometimes our chats look a little different, but we did have Nanda Patel. She is owner of Holiday Inn and Suites, Express and Suites. She owns one here and in Fort Payne. Extremely involved in tourism. You may have met Nanda before. She's very active in the state. Obviously, this is peak season for tourism. Not just the beach, but we have a lot of outdoor resources, and whatever insight you might be able to provide on, as you mentioned earlier, masks have unfortunately been politicized. But the fact is that when both parties wear masks, the infection rate decreases substantially. Any insight that you might have so that we can salvage our tourism season and reduce infection rates in our state?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and I think right now we've got to focus on trying to stop the spread of this virus. Salvaging things for the summer is going to be difficult at this point in mid-July, but we've got to salvage it for the future. And I am encouraging folks to please when you're and the business set an example and wear a face cover outside. We just have to, if the mask ordinance is not in your city, then to please wear a mask. It's for their benefit, it's for your employees' benefit. I think one of the things that we've got to look at in the next package of legislation, we've got to look at tourism because it's a problem not just in Alabama. It's a countrywide problem. Everybody has got tourism industries, just like restaurants and others, that are going to continue to suffer for some time. We've got to figure out a way to salvage those and the employees that work there. When we passed the CARES Act back in March, we were doing everything we could to try to make sure that folks could get by for a period of time. We didn't know how bad this virus was going to be. We didn't know how long this pandemic would last. It is clear that it is going to last longer than we anticipated back in March. And so we've got to make those adjustments. We did something very quickly. If you really think about it, we had 3 passed in about a 6-week period, which is incredible. We talk about bipartisanship, those bills passed the Senate unanimously. We did not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. Tourism is still a huge to do it. City and county governments. So we were now trying to focus on the individual areas that we can do as opposed to the broad brush that we did earlier. So certainly the tourism industry is something that is going to be needed. We don't need the hotels industry to go by the wayside because it's going to come back. It's just a question of time. But right now, people need to be encouraged to do everything they can to social distance, good hygiene, wear the mask, and let's try to get these therapeutics, let's try to get this vaccine done as soon as possible.
I think that wraps us up, Senator Jones. We are so appreciative of your time, of your efforts in Washington, of your care for this state. And we want to congratulate you again on the accolades from the U.S. Chamber, and thank you for reaching across the aisle, for working so hard for Alabama.
Well, thank you very much. I really enjoyed it. I think as we go forward, my office is open. The telephone lines are there. We're still working remotely, but please, I'm very serious. Don't hesitate to call us if you think we can be helped. There is no request that is too big or too small. If we can't get it done, we will tell you, but we will love them best. So today, I know I got a ton of our deadline. With that, thank you, friends up in Gadsden. Some of them are on this call for letting me be with you. Some of them didn't want to hear me shade it, and apologize.
Thank you so much, Senator. Thanks everyone for attending this morning. Again, this is recorded. We will have this posted later. Senator, we hope you have a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you.